Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the Federation of Canadian Municipalities' new Sustainable Affordable Housing Initiative. My name is Dominika Krzeminska, and I'm the Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives at the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association. For those of you who are not familiar with CHRA, we are a national member-based organization whose purpose is to strengthen the community housing sector for the benefits of all through advocacy, research, partnership, and membership services. If you're interested in learning more about us and our advocacy work and our programs, including the Housing Professionals Mentorship Program, our website and my contact information will be sent out in the follow-up email after today's webinar. Thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, I'll give a brief overview of the web technology and introduce our agenda and speakers for this afternoon's presentation. Today's webinar is in real time. You should now be able to see a title screen of today's presentation, and you should be able to hear me via your computer speakers, headset, or through your telephone if you've chosen to dial in. You are currently all muted, and we do this to minimize background noise. If you wish to ask questions, you may type them in the question chat box on the webinar control panel at any time during the presentation. We will address as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. Questions can be asked in French or English. Si vous avez des questions, vous pouvez les saisir dans le bois de discussion. Nous aborderons autant de questions que possible à la fin du webinaire. Vous pouvez poser des questions en français ou en anglais. Les diapositives en français peuvent être téléchargées sur le panneau de configuration du webinaire. So if you do want slides in, they're available for download right now on the control panel under handouts. So today we'll be hearing from Jen Arntfield, Sustainable Affordable Housing Lead at FCM's Green Municipal Fund, and Benjamin Koczwarski, Programs Outreach Advisor at FCM, on the new Green Municipal Fund's Sustainable Affordable Housing Initiative that support Canadian housing providers, including nonprofits, co-ops, and municipalities, in planning and delivering retrofit projects and new construction with significant energy efficiency measures. Welcome, Jen and Benjamin. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Dominika, and thank you to CHRA for hosting us today. Thanks to everyone who took the time to join us today. I hope that you've all been staying safe during this challenging time. We're so excited to be here today to be able to tell you about our new funding offer that's going to be launching on Friday of next week. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're joining you today from Ottawa on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. So, as Dominika mentioned, I'm the lead of Sustainable Affordable Housing here at the Green Municipal Fund, and I've been leading the development of this new program. I'm joined by my colleague Benjamin, who's leading our outreach with applicants for this offer. Briefly, this is an overview of what we're going to cover today. I'm going to let you know a little bit about who we are at FCM and the Green Municipal Fund, and then we're going to spend most of our time going over our new funding offer and giving you the information you'll need to apply when it opens on May 15th. We're also going to reserve time at the end of the session for questions, as Dominika mentioned, and because I know there are a lot of people here, if we don't get to your questions, we will follow up with responses in writing to anything we don't get to today. So for those of you that may not know FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has been the national voice of municipal government since 1901. We have nearly 2,000 members across the country, representing more than 90% of Canada's population. FCM advocates to the federal government on behalf of municipalities, and we also deliver programming to help municipalities tackle local challenges. Our largest program is the Green Municipal Fund, or GMF. It was established in the year 2000 and through an endowment from the federal government, and it's managed by FCM with oversight from Infrastructure Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and Natural Resources Canada. GMF is a leading program in driving local green innovation across the country through training, resources, and funding. To date, GMF has invested over $900 million in over 1,300 projects, resulting in a reduction of 2.6 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions, which is the equivalent of taking 594,000 cars off the road. In 2019, the federal budget significantly expanded the work of GMF through a $950 million investment in 3 new streams of programming focused on increasing energy efficiency in residences, large community buildings, and affordable housing units. Community efficiency financing is a fund that supports municipalities in establishing local programs for homeowners to complete energy retrofits. An initial offer for this program launched in March. And the LC3 FCM Community Climate Action Fund is still in development. It will support low carbon solutions in large community buildings and infrastructure. And then finally, what we're here to talk about today, $300 million was allocated for sustainable, affordable housing. In its 20 years, GMF has funded some local affordable housing projects, as you're going to see as we go through this presentation. However, this investment significantly expands our capacity to do so and has created a stream of funding that is focused on and designed to meet the needs of affordable housing projects specifically. Since last March, we've been working to develop a program that will fill a gap in funding for the affordable housing sector. The development of this offer involved significant stakeholder engagement and was largely informed by an advisory group of affordable housing experts currently working in the sector. So if any of them happen to be on the webinar, I'd like to thank them for their input. So the $300 million allocation is intended to fund projects over the next 7 years through approximately $52 million dispersed in loans and grants annually. This funding has been designed in consideration of other potential sources of funding available for affordable housing projects, and it's stackable with CMHC's National Housing Strategy programs, as well as other federal, provincial, or territorial and municipal funding. Our funding will also support capacity building activities, which we'll speak to later in the presentation. So overall, these are the objectives that the Sustainable Affordable Housing Fund is aiming to achieve. As part of the Green Municipal Fund, environmental objectives are at the core of this program. However, we also want to ensure that the environmental projects that we fund reduce utilities and operating costs and have positive social benefits as well. We're also aiming to increase the capacity of the sector to take on these types of green projects through capacity building activities and through supporting other sector organizations. For an organization to be eligible for our funding, the lead applicant must be either a municipal government, a municipally owned corporation, or a nonprofit housing provider or cooperative. Nonprofit housing providers include those delivering transitional housing, supportive housing, or non-market rental housing. Generally, we're looking for buildings that are owned and operated by one of these organizations. Federal, provincial, and territorial organizations, as well as private for-profit developers, are not eligible for this funding. So for a project to be eligible for our funding, we have both energy efficiency and an affordability requirement. Where possible, to simplify things for the applicants who may be applying to more than one funder, we've aligned the criteria of the National Housing Co-Investment Fund to these requirements. From an affordability perspective, rents for at least 30% of the units of a project must be less than 80% of the local median market rent. This requirement must be maintained for the duration of the financing contract with FCM. Retrofit projects must aim to achieve at least a 25% reduction in energy consumption, while new build projects must aim to achieve net zero energy ready or net zero energy. For either retrofits or new builds, we're not prescriptive in terms of the methods or standards used to achieve these thresholds. And we will accept a portfolio of projects in an application. However, each project will be required to meet these thresholds. The Sustainable Affordable Housing Offer has funding to support your projects at any stage from initial inception through construction. So I'm now going to pass it over to my colleague Benjamin to give you the details on what's available through each of these stages of funding.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. It's really exciting to see such a high level of interest in the new fund. I'm going to introduce a little bit about what you can do as an affordable housing provider or as a person working in the housing sector with the new funding that's come available. And it's worth mentioning that the 4 stages of funding that we have available here are eligible for any project that you're doing. So whether you're looking at an existing building and trying to do a retrofit that will result in some energy efficiency improvements, or if you're looking to build a new affordable housing development, you have access to our funding throughout the project development process. So you can apply for planning, studies, pilot project funding if eligible, and capital project funding, all for the same kind of initiative, all throughout the same project process. So I'll just go through what you can do at each of these different stages. At the outset, GMF is now offering a planning grant to assist eligible providers to conduct initial stages of concept development for an eligible project. The grant is for up to $25,000 for up to 80% of the costs of doing the work that it takes to get your energy efficiency project up off the ground. This means activities like developing a concept, conducting public engagement processes, conducting needs assessments, studying other projects, getting best examples. But overall, what we're asking you to do at this project conception stage is to embed environmental performance at the outset of your project. It's so important that you begin thinking of the environment right at the project concept development stage, which will enable you to integrate more fundamentally in the design of your project some of the energy outcomes that the fund is trying to help you achieve. The planning grant was designed in direct response to an identified gap that we had discussed with members of our advisory group during the development of this fund. They said that a lot of affordable housing providers weren't able to get projects off the ground because they didn't have initial support to really create the concept for an eligible project. So this planning grant is designed to be accessible and designed to give you a little bit of startup capital so that you'll be able to develop a project and move forward with the following stages. The planning grant should set you up well to apply for follow-on funding, either through a GMF study or through CMHC's seed funding. So you can use the planning grant also to apply for the next stages of funding. GMF offers a study grant of up to $175,000 for up to 50% of the eligible costs of a detailed study that really hashes out all of the details of the different aspects that will go into an energy efficiency, retrofit, or new build project. So it really is about analyzing different options in detail and assessing and modeling the energy outcomes. But it's important to note that other feasibility work can also be included within the scope of a GMF study grant. So that means if you need to assess the financial feasibility of a project, if you need to do a detailed market assessment, or if you have other kinds of engagement that you need to do, all of that can be covered within the scope of a GMF study. The main thing that we ask you to do is that in the study, you research in detail how to achieve the high level of energy outcomes. So either the 25% or greater reduction in energy in an existing building or the net zero energy ready new build. And here's an example of a study that GMF funded through its existing core funding, so prior to the creation of the Sustainable Affordable Housing Fund. It is a 254-unit affordable rental development in a prime location in downtown Ottawa. It was developed by the Centretown Citizens Ottawa Corporation, and it incorporates some really interesting and novel approaches to energy efficiency, including a geothermal heating and cooling system, but also some interesting technological innovations like a thermal barrier between the balconies and the buildings so that the coolness of the balcony doesn't pass into the building. GMF was able to support this project through a study grant valued at $42,000 out of a total study of $100,000. And it really does demonstrate that the affordable housing sector can innovate in energy efficiency. There's a case study online available with more details about this project right now. So if you'd like to visit our website and learn more, a little more about lessons learned from this project, it is available to you. Once you have a fully developed concept and you've moved through the study phase where you've assessed all the project options, you may want to go through a process where you develop a pilot project. We offer a grant of up to $500,000 for up to 80% of eligible costs to conduct a small scale test of an approach to energy efficiency on a small number of units in a larger development, or on one building type in advance of replication across a number of buildings that you may want to do the same kind of project on. What we're asking you to do at the pilot project phase is to research an innovative project that leads to even higher environmental outcomes than what would typically be achieved through the fund. So that could be any of a number of different initiatives, but that you're doing a small scale test that confirms the approach using that on site. Generally, a pilot project will lead into a larger scale capital project within your building portfolio. We have two different types of funding for the capital project, which is the large scale project that really does achieve those energy outcomes, completes the work on site. The first of those two is our retrofit funding, which is financing for up to $10 million for 80% of the eligible costs of a retrofit. The grant amount is 25 to 50% of the GMF funded amount, which is determined by the energy performance. The purpose of this capital financing is to retrofit existing homes, primarily to save energy, but also to complete other upgrades that you may need to take. So if that includes accessibility upgrades, that may include necessary renewal of key finishings. But the main thing is that in order to be eligible, it has to achieve a minimum 25% of energy savings. And the grant amount increases with greater energy savings, as indicated in the study that you've completed during the study stage. So if the study shows that you can complete works that will reduce overall energy consumption by 35%, then 35% of the funding amount that you ask for from GMF will be offered as a grant. If it can achieve energy savings of 50% or more compared to the current baseline, then we offer a grant of 50% of the total value of funding that you request from GMF. So really this incentivizes affordable housing developers and providers like yourselves to achieve greater energy outcomes through these retrofits, to really pursue optimum energy performance in these buildings. And again, the scope of work that you can cover in the retrofit will generally be assessed for all feasibility questions at the study stage. So by the end of the study stage, you should have a fairly good conception of what is affordable, what is feasible, what the building can support, so that when you're ready to go with a retrofit, the capital financing is fairly straightforward. And here's an example of a retrofit project that was also funded through the GMF core offer. It is a very large housing collection of housing that is operated by Toronto Community Housing, retrofits to 7 community buildings with 1,500 residents in them. Through the project, they were able to reduce GHG emissions by 30%. And a lot of those improvements were actually through upgrades to existing mechanical systems. So during the study, they recognized that the existing air ducts were causing a significant loss of heat, and simply replacing the air ducting system resulted in a 40% gain in efficiency of the overall heating and ventilation system of the building. They added in some smart energy controls, including smart thermostats, and in total, the project was able to reduce the utility costs for Toronto Community Housing by $500,000 per year. So by integrating design and implementation, the project cost-effectively reduced energy consumption and GHG emissions while improving tenant comfort and air quality. Again, the case study about this project is available on our website, so please do feel free to visit the website after for the case studies if you'd like to know a little more detail. I'd just like to mention that the loan and grant amounts indicated at the top corner of your page reflect the funding offer that was available previously. But now what we would be able to offer is a larger grant proportion that corresponds directly to the amount of energy savings afforded in the project. The last type of funding that we have available is our capital project financing for new builds. Again, the funding offers up to $10 million per project, but in this case, we offer financing for 20% of the overall cost of the project, of which 50% is a grant. The reason why we've limited it to 20% of the overall building costs is that we acknowledge that there is already a lot of financing available for new construction projects through national housing strategy programs, including CMHC's co-investment funds, and through other programs in provinces and territories across Canada. So what we've tried to do in this case is optimize our impact at the energy efficiency outcomes portion of the project. We look at the overall budget, but we found oftentimes that to build to the high standard that we're trying to achieve, that we're hoping that you'll be able to achieve, it can often cost somewhere between 7 and 15% of the total project budget. So we offer financing for 20% of the eligible costs, of which half is a grant, and that 10% grant amount oftentimes covers all of the additional costs involved in building to the net zero energy ready standard. So again, this financing is available to new construction projects to help them build homes to a higher energy performance standard, with the target being net zero energy ready. Net zero energy ready means that the building is built to such a high standard of energy efficiency that all of the energy needs of the building could theoretically be met through on-site renewable energy generation. That could mean solar panels on the roof, that could mean wind turbines, that could mean other means of generating renewable energy. You would cover the types of renewable energy that you would use at the study stage and demonstrate that it is possible to build renewable energy to cover all of the energy demand, the reduced energy demand of the buildings. But we don't necessarily require that energy generation capacity be installed. There are often technical reasons and local regulation reasons why it is not possible to install renewable energy. We certainly encourage you to do so, but it isn't required to be eligible for the fund. There are a range of standards out there that really indicate the type of energy efficiency within the buildings that we're looking for. Passive house is growing in popularity in Canada. LEED Platinum is another energy standard. You don't need to meet these energy standards, but they offer really good guidance as to the type of energy efficiency measures that will achieve the higher outcomes that we're looking for. And here's a final example of another project that was funded through GMF's core fund. It was operated by Niagara Regional Housing, a 67-unit seniors independent living project. It incorporated geothermal energy and other energy and water efficiency measures, and it achieved LEED Silver under the GMF core program. Out of a $9.7 million capital budget for this project, $1.2 million was funded through GMF. So they just were asking for a small piece of funding to cover the additional costs related to building to a higher energy standard. So in summary, you may want to take a snapshot of this page because it lays out all of the funding amounts available throughout these project stages. But just to summarize, we're really trying to offer funding in appropriate amounts at each stage of a project to help you move through a logical and achievable project development process so that you can achieve the outcomes that you're really looking to do, either to retrofit your existing buildings or to build a new project that brings more affordable housing online.
Okay, so once we get all these great projects in the door, how are we going to be evaluating them? So projects applying for sustainable affordable housing funding at GMF will be evaluated based on criteria within these three themes. We'll be looking for projects with high impact, which is where those triple bottom line benefits of a project will be considered. Clearly, Green Municipal Fund, energy, and GHG emissions are the most important criteria within this impact theme, but it's also important to note that we recognize that there are differences in terms of size of providers, as well as regional considerations, urban versus rural considerations. All of this will be taken into account through that relative impact criteria. The implementation criteria pretty simply looks for projects that have a strong project management rigor and strong financials. And then the transformative potential criteria. Here we're looking for providers that are trying new things, that are kind of pushing their own boundaries in terms of what they're attempting, particularly from an environmental perspective. But we also want to ensure that energy cost savings are going to be realized. So we're also looking for kind of within that replication component of the criteria for projects that are using proven solutions and best practices, but just kind of pushing their own boundaries really within that transformative potential criteria. Next. So the evaluation criteria, as well as all the information you're going to need to apply, will be available on our website on May 15th, which is next Friday when this funding offer opens. To apply for planning grants, you'll be able to access a very simple application and workbook online and apply directly. All the information and instructions that you need are right in that form. For studies, pilots, and capital projects, the application process involves 2 steps. First, there's an initial proposal form that will be available online on the 15th. When you submit your initial proposal form, that comes into staff, and a project officer internally will basically look at that project to confirm your eligibility and then get back to you with the full application and the project workbook to complete that full application. The idea here is so that you don't spend a whole lot of time and effort working through a full application process only to find out the project was not necessarily eligible for funding. So you will hear back with that eligibility confirmation within 15 business days of your initial proposal being submitted. So while the full application form is not available online, all of the details as to what is contained in that form will be in the application guide that will be on our website next Friday. So you can still have a good sense that there's no surprises in terms of what's in there and what we're going to ask when we get back to you after the initial proposal. It's all laid out in the application guide for you to follow there. So our funding decisions in terms of when you can expect to hear back. For planning and study grants, we will typically reach a funding decision within 2 to 3 months. And for funding decision on a pilot or a capital project, you'll typically hear back within 4 to 6 months. Our applications will be accepted on a continuous basis until annual funds are exhausted, at which time that will be communicated via our website or if you've already applied, and then applications will be held until the next year where annual funding opens up again.
As part of your submission, we do require some supporting documents to provide evidence that you've met our energy eligibility thresholds and also evidence about your organization and the type of project that you're doing. Details of these supporting documents are available in that application guide that Jen mentioned. So it's definitely worth taking a look through the application guide next Friday or in the weeks following that to find out what kinds of evidence we're looking for. But for all projects, we're looking for your organization's constatting documents, which are essentially your articles of incorporation. Demonstrate to us that you're an eligible recipient, an eligible nonprofit or municipal corporation. In all cases, also because we're the Green Municipal Fund, we require evidence of your local municipality's support. If you know GMF, you know that in other funds we've asked for municipal financial contribution. We don't ask for that in this case, but we still want evidence, for example, a letter from your CAO that the municipality is involved in the project and that they support the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. We also require evidence of consultation with your provincial and territorial government. That is provided in a template and clear instructions are provided as to how to go about doing that. There are a few other requirements for study grants and for pilot project grants, and all of that is laid out in the application guide. For capital project financing, we have a little bit weightier application expectations. First of all, your feasibility study needs to be complete with energy models and calculations that demonstrate the energy outcomes of the project and the feasibility of the project in other ways. The affordability of the units should ideally be shown in the feasibility study. Any market assessment or needs assessments that you've done should also be incorporated into the gambit of that study. We're also looking for financial documentation that is similar to the kinds of financial documentation that you'd provide to any conventional lender or to CMHC when applying for loan financing from them. So that includes project financial documentation, such as cost estimates and projections, demonstrating the financial outcome and ratios for the project itself, but also organizational financial information, including your financial statements and outstanding loan coverage that you're needing to take care of. Overall, what we're trying to achieve through this is to make sure that the project is not just an outstanding energy project, but that it's also feasible and affordable and attainable for your organization and not too much of a financial strain on you. And again, ideally, you would be able to use the study funds to make sure that a lot of these financial feasibility questions are answered. The Sustainable Affordable Housing Fund will offer training, resources, and tools to help you innovate and achieve these types of projects. It's not covered in the scope of our webinar today, but training such as webinars will help you learn from best practices around Canada, identify different measures that you can incorporate into your projects and give guidance as to how to get going with a project. We also have resources and tools such as case studies and guides. I've mentioned a few of the case studies in our presentation today. You can visit our website and take a look at those resources that are available now, and there are a lot more coming down the pipeline. So definitely keep in touch over the coming months for further resources on project concept development. We also look to provide networking opportunities and peer learning, especially as we begin to develop more lessons learned through projects from peers in the sector. We'll certainly be looking to share those lessons broadly across Canada to make sure that everyone learns about great things and also about lessons learned so that we can all learn from the work that we're doing. So if you visit fcm.ca/resources, you'll find our entire resource library, and in that there's some resources dedicated to affordable housing in particular. The funding opens on May 15th. All of the materials that we've talked about today will be on the website as of that date. So please do visit at some point on May 15th or in the weeks to follow, where you can download the application guide and take a look at the application forms and pre-application forms available. You can access the information through our website, fcm.ca/sustainable affordable housing. Type it all out and it'll link you to the information we have available now, and then a lot more information coming on the 15th. You can also subscribe to our FCM Connect newsletter, which will provide additional information about FCM programs and the different things that they can do for your organization, and some great lessons and knowledge products shared that way as well. And then I welcome you to get in touch with our team through gmfinfo@fcm.ca or our 1-800 number. Set up a booking, and we'll be happy to have a conversation about the project you have in mind and how it fits into the funding world that we're creating here, and hopefully how GMF can support you to achieve some great outcomes. The last thing I'd like to mention, and perhaps Jen might be able to provide a little more information on this, is that we're recruiting a seat on our GMF Council, specifically from the affordable housing sector. So if you or somebody you know is a leader in the affordable housing industry, in the sector, please get in touch with us through the contact us information there below, and we'll happily entertain applications to be part of our council, who reviews, approves, and provides guidance on the types of projects that we support through this fund. So thank you again for joining us today, and I'm happy to join Jen in answering some of your questions.
The only thing I'll add, since you put it out there for me to do so, Benjamin, is that Dominica has kindly offered to share the link to that application for our GMF Council in the follow-up with any additional answers to questions and with the survey for the webinar as well. So we'll make sure that information is sent out at the end of this webinar.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. Thank you so much, Jen and Benjamin. That was very informative, and there are a lot of questions that have come through for you guys. So I'll do my best at asking as many of them that have not yet been answered in the presentation. I'm sorry if some of them have already been answered and that I missed that piece. And then, like Jen said at the beginning, if we do not get to your question, just because I have about 25 minutes and a significant amount of questions to get through, Jen and Benjamin will answer questions based on the theme of the question by email, and we'll send that out to all of the participants in this webinar. Okay, so do not worry if your question has not been answered. May 15th is a week away. Okay, so we're going back all the way to the beginning of your presentation. And the first question is a simple one. Are financial cooperatives, i.e. credit unions, eligible for the funding?
We are looking for nonprofit housing providers, so I would think not, but we may need to take a look at the kind of in the context of the applicant itself and kind of try to understand if it's an affordable housing project coming from an organization that is nonprofit and hasn't operated housing in the past, we could potentially work with you. So I would encourage in a case like this where it's maybe not black and white to reach out to our outreach team with the details of your project, and we can help work through that with you.
Okay. It's worth noting that credit unions and local financial partners are often really important financial support providers for many of these types of projects, and we've designed our funding to work with those providers as well. So if you do represent a credit union and you are involved in some projects like this, we fund the project directly, but we can create a symbiotic funding relationship where both financial sources are adequately included.
Okay, I said simple question. I'm sorry, I guess. One thing that keeps coming up in the questions, and I'll just answer, is people are asking if a recording will be available of this webinar, and the answer is yes. We'll have it up on the CHRA website by the end of the week. And we'll also be sending it out through our, we could send it out to the participants as well of this webinar by email. So don't worry about that, that'll be provided. So the next question is about the 25% energy reduction the energy savings that you had mentioned at the beginning. There's a few questions about this, and basically asking what's the benchmark for the energy savings, for that 25%.
So we look at the baseline of where the building is now and where the building is intended to be based on what's included in the study. The energy that we're looking for is the total energy consumption of the building. So whether it's natural gas sources, whether you're still operating some old oil or fuel heating, and also energy, your consultant at the study stage will be able to analyze that and get a gigajoule figure or get a kilowatt hour figure that demonstrates your total annual energy consumption in the building. And what we're asking for is that in the study you assess and in the project you install a range of different energy efficiency measures that will reduce that overall energy consumption by 25% or more. Again, 25% will get you a 25% grant proportion, 35% would get you a 35% grant proportion, all the way up to 50% or greater, receiving 50%. And that isn't always necessarily high technology either. A lot can be achieved through insulation improvements. A lot can be achieved through new windows, cutting out drafts. As I mentioned in that Toronto example, just through redoing the ducts of the building, they're able to achieve savings of 40% of waste heat in the building, which is just an incredible amount. If anyone from the Toronto project is on the line, I'm sure they're saying, well, that's not quite it, Ben. But the gist of it is that through some conventional improvements to a building, you can actually really improve the overall energy efficiency of your building.
Thank you. All right, the next question is for the portfolio application that you had mentioned at the beginning. Are you able to, are applicants able to do a portfolio application for all stages of funding, such as planning, for example, or just for the capital component?
That's a good question. We will require an application for each stage. That being said, we are still, this being a new fund, we're looking at perhaps opportunities to kind of fast track if you've come through one stage and then you're moving to the next in terms of kind of getting the applications through the full life cycle of a project. But just because so much more information becomes clear through each stage, we then do require that you kind of move through and apply it at each stage.
Okay. Next question is, are seismic retrofit costs eligible?
As long as the project achieves the energy outcomes, in general, all other retrofit costs are eligible to be covered. There are certain exclusions, which we always have to throw in caveats like that. But in general, accessibility, retrofit, foundation work, if you have to do that, all of that could be covered in the scope of your retrofit capital project and study. But all that we would really ask you to do is also look at financial feasibility when looking into these things, because we certainly don't want to encourage you to retrofit a building that may be better off, reconstructed from the ground up, that you may achieve better outcomes in that way. So, at the study stage, definitely look at the feasibility of different options to make sure that you're, using your assets to their optimum potential.
Maybe I'll just use this opportunity to just kind of re-plug our application guide as an excellent resource. There's an appendix in the guide that has a very kind of detailed table that lays out eligible costs within a number of categories, and then ineligible costs in a number of categories as well. So it again is just a great tool in terms of planning your project and planning your application, and so I encourage on the 15th for you to go check that out.
Thank you. So building on the study that you're talking about, the eligibility study, for the capital projects, what if they're already shovel ready and the study has been done and it's not been funded by through this program or through GMF? How do they determine eligible activities?
No part of the process is required. So if you're ready to go with a capital project and you've got a complete study that addresses everything that we would require for a capital project application, you can absolutely submit that. And myself and my team can provide guidance for what we're looking for. And one of the best things about GMF as a funder is that it's not a black hole. You're not submitting your application into the void. We'll get back to you and say, we need a little more information on something, and give you the opportunity to provide that. So certainly, no matter where you are in the process of project development, if you're shovel ready, or even at the early stages of construction, there's still opportunity to access the fund, as long as you meet the eligibility criteria, which are just so essential. And we recognize that they're high, but we are looking for that in every project.
Great, thank you. You've answered a couple of questions. So the next question is, you had mentioned for new builds, when you say eligible costs, does that mean total project costs?
Yes, yeah, total project costs. Even project management, detailed design costs, you can include all of that in the scope of work for a capital project.
Great. All right, let me look up. There's a few more. I say a few more, there's lots more. So what are the terms of the loan portion for retrofits and new builds?
Go ahead, Jen.
Okay, so that is something that we will kind of work through based on the applicant's needs. They're typically 10 or 20 years. We can go up to 30 years, but we'll kind of work work through that with you based on your application and what you're looking for.
Okay. Next question is a passive house certification considered net zero ready?
You hit my funny bone. We're working on that. The CMHC Co-Investment Fund recently announced that they'll be accepting passive house certification on its own to meet their energy standards. We've always used as the indicator the percentage of energy efficiency reduction versus a baseline, which in the case of a new build would be a theoretical building built to NECB standards. Passive house uses a different set of metrics. All I can say is we're working on it. Probably. There are some really great energy modeling programs out there like Energy Plus, CanQuest, which provide good, detailed insight into new build energy performance. PHPP does as well, which is the passive house modeling software. We just need to make sure that internally we have the ability to process and get the energy performance analysis that we need out of PHPP. So that's just going to have to be a stay tuned, but if you're working on a passive house and you're building a PHPP model right now, don't hesitate to get in touch because it's the standard that we're going for. It's the standard that we're going for. So absolutely, yeah.
Great, thank you. Jen, you had already responded to this in a way. I don't know if you want to provide a little bit more detail, but it's a question around the evaluation criteria, and it's wondering if you are balancing builds in larger cities, provinces, and smaller communities, provinces. It could be much harder to get financing in smaller communities, and large developers are either not here or those that are here are not interested in affordable housing. So I know that you had mentioned that the eligibility criteria, the evaluation criteria will be looking at that, but if you want to provide a little bit more detail into how.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should mention there's kind of two considerations that actually take that into account. The Green Municipal Fund overall, to meet our requirements through our funder, the federal government, we have a requirement to achieve a regional balance across the country and fund projects across the country in urban settings and in rural settings. And that's something that we look at kind of for the Green Municipal Fund writ large, and then we will also be looking at for the Sustainable Affordable Housing Fund specifically as well. And we're going to be adding kind of another layer in terms of kind of size of provider and type of provider to ensure that there's also some balance there and that we're not kind of skewing all to like large municipal provider, for example. We're looking to ensure that we maintain balance in our funding. So generally internally, we'll be looking at that as a decision. And then from an evaluation perspective as well, we have an external peer review committee, and all of the projects that come through are reviewed by external peer reviewers. And so those criteria are what the peer reviewers are looking at. So kind of within that impact consideration, the peer reviewers will be looking at that relative scale in terms of, is this project one that would be kind of challenging, kind of depending on how large the provider is, their own kind of context within their municipality or their community as well.
Great, thank you, Jen. So here's a question on a bit of a different aspect of the program, but when looking at the social impact, are you prioritizing any sort of populations such as Indigenous people, senior, women, etc.?
Another good question. I would say we're not prioritizing any, and when we're talking about social benefits, I would say we recognize, just as a standard, providing affordable housing is providing a social benefit. Like there's no question about that. So when we're talking about social benefits from an evaluation perspective, we're looking for more things like, are there kind of additional consideration of social benefits above and beyond what just providing affordable housing for any population would be? So things like air quality, resident health and comfort, maybe addressing overcrowding. So it's about those kind of additional, maybe honestly, like cooling, considering, you know, with climate change and the rising temperatures, more and more cooling is becoming a true health consideration. So it's things like that. So how does a project kind of go above and beyond the fact that it inherently has social benefits by being an affordable housing project? I also actually just want to kind of go back to my last response, because I did want to add one thing we didn't mention in our presentation, but it is in the application guide, plugging it one more time, is that we do recognize that for northern applicants, there are some unique considerations in particular, and that the cost of building can be quite high. Timelines can take a bit longer. So we do offer increased grant amounts, kind of based on the same program structure, but increased grant amounts for northern applicants. So there's some details on that in the application guide as well.
Great, thank you. The next question, we have two similar questions going back to the energy reduction, energy efficiency. So the question, I'll kind of combine them. For capital projects that are new builds, sorry, back for a second. In your presentation, you spoke of specific energy reduction criteria. Does the program support projects with only modest energy reduction, but very substantial greenhouse gas emission reductions? And then the other question that relates to this one is, why is energy efficiency the metric for determining funding as opposed to reduction in carbon pollution, for example? So related
I'll
questions
answer the first question, and Jen, if you could sort of talk a little bit more about the energy efficiency ethos of the program. So we do an evaluation based on each project, and we evaluate each project on its individual merits. We look at everything you send us, and as Jen said, we look for, you know, other supporting factors like meeting our strong social need in the region, you know, other things that the project achieves. And one of those that's really, really important to us is the carbon emissions reductions. So it is a key secondary criteria that in many cases can have a strong influence over the overall attractiveness of the project. But we're still looking for energy as the primary means to determine eligibility of a project. So if you're considering a project that is reducing energy consumption, but it's mostly just shifting energy loads, let's say from an old oil burning furnace to like new baseboards or something like that, we recognize the carbon emission benefits that can bring. But we hope that you can work with us through the process to identify other ways of bringing energy efficiency to your project, that you're not just going from a really inefficient furnace or oil boiler to relatively inefficient baseboard heaters. Not to knock on baseboards, there certainly is a role for them in the world, but we hope that you'll be able to work with us through the process to find those 25% energy reduction in the project. I also just want to mention that up to 10% of that 25% can actually come from renewable energy generation. So if you do have a project that slightly decreases your overall energy consumption profile, and you want to push the bar even higher in order to achieve the 25% that we require, you could install some solar panels or some wind generation or something to that effect that would just reduce your overall annual draw from the grid by that extra 10%. So I love to give long answers. Carbon is so important, and it's such a huge part of our national objectives. You know, as a country right now, we're moving towards decarbonizing in many of the sectors that we work in. So it's so important in the housing sector, but try to work with us to find other ways of increasing energy efficiency as well.
Sure, and just to add in terms of the why we landed on energy versus GHGs in terms of our actual eligibility threshold, that was certainly something that we thought about quite a bit and did some consultation on, had a lot of conversations about, a lot of research went into that one, but kind of what it boiled down to at the end of the day is the connection between energy efficiency and affordability, and the objective of this program to also be ensuring that any projects that we fund are having at a minimum a neutral impact, but ideally a positive impact in terms of reducing utility bills, reducing operating costs. And so that was what drove us to the decision to focus on energy efficiency as the eligibility threshold. But as Benjamin mentioned, GHG emissions reductions are also a consideration in the evaluation of projects.
Certainly, if you're doing a project that increases GHG emissions, we really have to look at that one twice and try to propose alternate solutions that are also favorable for emissions reductions.
Fair enough. Okay, so the next question is another combo. There's a few of these questions floating around, but basically, if you already are receiving CMHC funding for a project, such as, for example, the co-investment fund, are eligible for this funding still? So is it stackable with some of the CMHC programs that are available currently?
So yes, in fact, that factored in quite a bit. I hope you see some of that in our design. We recognize that $300 million is a lot of money compared to even the $13 billion in the co-investment fund, for example. We're fairly small. So that factored into the way that we designed our program overall. Particularly, you see that in new builds in terms of just funding that additional energy kind of objectives. But all this to say, yes, it's stackable. In fact, we have this in our application guide as well. If you've already applied to CMHC and are looking for funding from us for the same project, as a starting point, send us that application and we'll see what we can do in terms of actually just taking the information we need from there and then asking you to just complete what we don't have and what we require for our application, as opposed to going through the full application process with us too. So yes.
Okay, and a follow-up question to that one, and then I'll ask one more before I think we have to end today's dinner. But so if a project is already financed by something like this CMHC's co-investment fund, will FCM have to do a completely new underwriting process, or can you defer to CMHC to avoid duplication?
We will take a lot of the due diligence that CMHC does as part of our financial analysis, and certainly, if you've qualified for CMHC funding through your financial descriptions of the project, that will set you on a good pace to qualify for a loan through GMF as well. It is important to consider that if you've already been awarded CMHC funding, additional loans may have an influence on the overall financial balance of your project. So we really should have a conversation at the outset to see, first of all, if CMHC would be amenable to additional loans being secured against the project, because our loans are secured against the building. And also to see if the funding ratio changes significantly when you add the loan amount. Of course, the goal of the program is that the grants will actually make a lot more projects financially viable, so that the grant portion, which are sizable for retrofits and new builds, will help improve the overall financial picture of the project. But as part of our due diligence, we'll go through a thorough analysis that includes suitability for further loans connected to the project.
Great, thank you. And the final question, it's another one about eligibility. It's not the final question, there are a lot more questions. The final question we can get to today. And like I said to everybody, we will be emailing answers to the other questions. They may be put together thematically, but there will be answers. So the final question is, are affordable home ownership projects eligible through this initiative, through the fund?
Generally, no, they're not. We are focused on affordable rental projects.
Okay, so even if they're nonprofit, it's rental. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much to both of you, to Jen and Benjamin. I see a lot of comments coming through the question box thanking you and saying that this is really exciting and that people are excited for the applications to come out and for them to be able to apply. So I think anticipate a lot over the next little while, and anticipate a lot of questions coming your way as well. So I want to also thank the audience for participating today and for all the questions that we got to and that we will get to through email. Just another plug for HRA. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, if you'd like to learn more about us, the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association, and learn more about future webinars that we'll be putting on like this by FCM, our website and contact information will be in the follow-up email that is sent about an hour after the webinar. So many thanks from all of us here at HRA, again, to our audience for participating, and to Jen and Benjamin for the presentation. Today's webinar recording, as well as the French and English slides, will be shared on our website in the coming days. Thank you, everyone. Take care and stay safe. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.